Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Wadier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Wadier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation, and it is in the smack dab in the middle of summer here in Houston. It's hot, right? I don't want to eat when it's hot. Right. So we're going to talk all things fasting. Well, we talk all things fasting on this podcast anyway, but welcome in. We're going to look at how to restore and optimize health through intermittent fasting. The tried and true art of fasting has been around since the dawn of time. We can go back and see how fasting has been applied through the years, through the ages. And in today's world, it is now becoming a more accepted form, an accepted practice in the weight loss and health space. Specifically, we talk a lot about blood sugar and diabetes reversal, et cetera, metabolic conditions and metabolic disorders here on this podcast. But today we want to go big picture on really how to restore and optimize your health. And that's really what it's all about. That's what brought Tommy and I to fasting. If you're new to the podcast and you want to hear our story and why we do what we do each and every week, why we have coaching, why we have challenges, why we have all the resources, the website, et cetera, it's because fasting transformed our lives. So if you're new, head back to episode 1, take a listen, hear our story and why we do what we do week in and week out. And then if you're a long-term listener, just thank you again for continuing to support, download, subscribe, share, bookmark, whatever the technology is these days that you do and wherever you listen to your podcasts, whatever app you use. We appreciate you continuing to be on this fasting for life journey with us, Tommy. So here is my question to you, sir, as we start this conversation is the tried and true art of fasting. Have you ever witnessed a dog that is sick that is refusing to eat?
Yes.
All right.
Many times.
You've got 2. Yep. I've got 3.
Yep.
You have 2 kids. I have 3. Guess what? Same goes for kids when they're not feeling well.
Yeah.
Before they get sick sign for my kids is, this is their favorite dinner and they're not eating it. I wonder if you're not feeling well. So here's the reality of it. If we're talking about the dog analogy, it doesn't matter how much you tempt him. He won't eat until he's truly hungry. So the similar thing happens in the human body, like I just said with our kids. So in today's world, trying to just keep up with the pace of life and the distractions and the technology and just the chaos of today's world that we live in, we tend to ignore or just mute our body's signals.
Or maybe rationalize.
Yep. Rationalize. So the body signals I'm really referring to are the fact that when we see food, we smell food, we go shopping, we cook dinner for our families or kids, we travel, we watch TV, right? You see the food trucks. We're going to prioritize a lot of those short-term actions over long-term goals. It's just the world we live in. Obesogenic food, yes, more than ever. Sugar-laden foods, yes, more than ever. Is that fully to blame? No, it's our actions in those environments that ultimately have us end up in a place where we have health concerns, weight to lose, et cetera, et cetera. So think back, Tommy, back to your great-grandparents, your grandparents. Do you really, and there are these pictures online, right? And I won't go down the rabbit hole with this, but where you look back and you see the pictures from the beaches back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah.
Versus now, if you go to the beach here in Texas, the difference in body shape and body type that we see, we know that 70+% of the population is overweight or obese. So think back, did we have less or more obesity back then? Did we have less or more diabetes or less or more blood pressure or less or more chronic disease, heart disease, cancers, Alzheimer's? Well, the answer is, we're seeing these things earlier and earlier, but we're also seeing them in much greater population density now than we ever have.
Yeah, I think back then it was probably easier to not ignore those signals that came from the body that we could interpret without all of this outside noise that you're alluding to. And then also think of some of the dopamine pathways, some of the reward pathways for some of the hyper processed and hyper palatable foods. Sometimes when we might be like our children getting those like subconscious signals that, hey, you know what, I'm really not hungry right now, maybe because there's something going on, my body's working on something else, and it's telling me, hey, I don't really need to bring in food because I have other jobs to do for, rest and heal and repair and immune function, all of these things. Let's forget about digestion for a minute. Whereas as we get older and we have these dopamine pathways and we're used to some of the hyperpalatable foods that we know or we have cravings for, they can be so tempting sometimes, or we have so many thoughts about them that it can be hard to ignore sometimes, even when our body's trying to tell us something else. It doesn't always win. So it's almost like you can see the scale being tipped one way or the other. And there's often times where we would actually feel better if we listened and correctly interpreted that signal, and fasted through some of those times when we're going through something else within our body, right?
Yeah, and the reality is it's just a lot's changed over the last 100 years, right? So
Mhm.
more high blood sugar, cholesterol, blood pressure, heart disease, fatty liver, knee replacement, all that stuff is normal. Go to any family reunion, right? And that's all the conversation, right? It's all
Yeah.
the bee's knees. That's what everybody's talking about. And not to forget autoimmune and, cancer and Alzheimer's and all the things, we have it in our family, and it's just so prevalent. And,
Mhm.
we, to your point about today's world versus back in the day, we have a lot more comfort in our daily life. We've moved away from the more natural things that we used to do as we moved from the farms into the industrial cities and the industrial revolution. And by no means am I an expert on that, so I'm going to stop talking about it. But the needs and desires and priorities change. So did our lifestyle and food choices and disease patterns. So we just can't stick our head in the sand and say, well, it's not all the food's fault, right?
Sure, of course.
Right? Because it's the same foods we ate back then as we have now, but they're just more accessible, more convenient, and more processed than ever, right? So
Sure.
life was
Doorstep deliveries.
right. Oh, and you can just DoorDash it right to your door, right? Groceries, so
Right.
you can cook
Yeah.
it or somebody else cooks it for you and brings it to you, right?
Mhm.
So it was much simpler back in the day. And I don't know where this 3 meals a day with snacks came into play,
Yeah.
but it's overwhelming. If I ever do nowadays eat more than twice a day, I just don't feel good.
Right. And you realize that, what the difference feels like too. Whereas you may have had the same physical feelings like in years past, but may have not been able to interpret them, like with all of the noise and not seeing the other side of it, or not ever having gone more than a few hours between meals, right? Intentionally.
Never mind to add in the fact that I'm sitting in a chair in front of a desk recording a podcast. I also do consulting and coaching in a chair
Mm,
in front of a desk in front of a screen
right.
day in and day out. That's what I do. Much different than when I was in clinical practice, running around a clinic all day seeing patients, getting my
Mm.
steps in. But we are so much more sedentary than we ever have been before.
But that's a cool point, though, that your health is actually better now than it was back then, when you were much, much, much more
In
active,
the
like all
exercise space
throughout
for
the day,
sure.
right? Yeah, that's pretty cool. I hadn't really thought about that though.
So when we're looking at me either until just kind of prepping for this conversation, when we think about this, so we've got all these changes, modern day culture, continuous snacking, 3 meals, doorstep deliveries, as you said, right? DoorDash it,
Mhm.
Instacart it, whatever those they are. We use Instacart, right? Because I just don't like dealing with crowds. Not all the time, but there are days where I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that today. Nope.
All
So
right.
when we look at this eating multiple times a day, there's a lot of stuff that is, breakfast is the most important meal a day. There's a lot of
Mm.
finish your plate. There's a lot of, my dad used to say, there's starving kids in Africa. Eat the food
Starving
that's
kids. Yep,
right in front of you.
I got that one.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah, my dad worked hard. Blue collar worker. Worked with his hands. Worked in a grocery store chain as a receiving manager. Drove trucks, 52, what are they called? Those CDLs, right? Had a
Mm.
CDL license, drove tractor trailers. And it was always like that food, was I don't want to say forced to be consumed, but it was highly encouraged, right?
Yeah. It was served. It was cooked. It was served. Now it's time to eat it.
In today's world, it blows my mind that our kids will get up. We don't feed them breakfast typically unless they ask. And then maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're off to daycare or they're off to school now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when they were in daycare, they would have a snack time, like usually like an hour after they arrive. And then an
Right.
hour after that is lunch, and then nap, and then snack time, and then playtime, and then snack time, and then they come home and eat dinner. I'm like, yes, when kids, they can obviously consume a lot more. They're growing, they need more
Yeah.
fuel. But why are we snacking all the time? Like, why is that part of the program? It just never made
Yeah.
sense to me. So my kids are really smart, just like the dog example. They're intuitively smart when it comes to knowing what their body needs. Now, we're not talking about terminal illness here, right? We're talking about a stomach bug, or you're not feeling well for a few days, or you've had some poor nights of sleep,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So when we look at fasting is a way to really start to undo and tap into some of the present time consciousness of your behavior when it comes to the world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
So simply changing your time or your windows, or what we call time restricted eating, because now fasting can be taboo in some circles, right? Why would you starve yourself, right? I think we're over that mainly in our world, but we live in a fasting bubble,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you would just simply put in, restriction into when you're going to eat food. It's not that difficult to consider that changing your meal timing or restricting the time you eat could ultimately decrease your intake and allow your body to rest and digest more than constantly be worried about burning fuel.
Mm. And even maybe rest and digest through some of those old meals that I ate too. If I previously overconsumed, or I previously didn't have enough time to burn through, because I mean, honestly, if you're taking in food 3 times a day, but you're not a growing body, that's a lot of opportunity for not only calories and potentially excess calories, but also the wrong hormonal signals. Because if blood sugar is getting a little bit too high, and then insulin response is having to be a little bit too high because it's basically overcompensating for that blood sugar response, that's problematic, because that insulin then tells the body to store fuel as long-term fat stores, and it's much faster to do that than it is to actually tap into those, to open those back up for fuel utilization, especially if the next meal is right around the corner. So really, like for most adults, 3 meals a day ends up just being excessive at a certain point. It might not be in your teens like it was for me, and it might not even be in your 20s or your 30s, but typically you'll hear most people somewhere between 40 and 50 go, I just can't burn through it like I used to. I just can't get it off like I used to be able to. But sometimes the solution is staring them right in the face, where you go, well, it might just be a little bit too often that you're bringing food in, and that can be like a real paradigm shift, for a lot of us.
Especially if you're looking at your social circles, right? And the way people don't
Yes.
even realize, right? They're just in this pattern. That's what I'm saying, this present time awareness of like, are we really supposed to be doing this? Does this make
Is it
sense?
best?
Right?
Yeah.
So when you start fasting, that one of the other big levers that made a difference for me was really focusing on my sleep, because there's these things that we've been told, like it doesn't matter if you eat at 8 a.m. or 8 p.m., just count your
Yeah.
calories and exercise, right?
If it fits my
If it fits
macros.
your
Yeah.
macros, right? All those different things. For me, it never worked out. I know now, I have a rule, like, and I stick to it most nights. I don't eat more than closer to 3 hours of bedtime. I
Mm-hmm.
won't do it. I prefer to
It's
eat
a good rule.
earlier. And it's not that those calories necessarily at night are worse. Maybe your food choices are worse. Maybe your
Sure.
stress is higher. Maybe you're tired and you're less likely to make better decisions. But ultimately, if you just compared, you know, eucaloric diets of people that ate the same amount during the day versus the same amount at night, it's not necessarily going to see a big swing in the results in terms of weight. But what I know will happen due to the calories is what I'm saying. I know what happens for me is my sleep is affected. I don't sleep as well, especially if it's like higher carb, if there's alcohol involved back in the day, right? I don't do as
Mm.
well with those meals later in the day anymore. So what I've noticed is the next day, on the days that I eat later, I have a lot less willpower and ability to stick to my windows and stick to my fasting. Not
Yeah.
because I ate the food and the and all the stuff. It's just literally because my sleep is affected, and when my sleep's affected, my decision making and my blood sugar regulation the next day are ultimately affected.
Yeah, everything's a lot more volatile with lower quality sleep, less duration and or lower quality, because if you can't transition into the proper sleep stages at the right time and the right in the right cyclical nature the night before, it really throws off the whole repair and healing process that then leads to the next day. How are your energy levels? What's your brain fog looking like? And how are you functioning physically and mentally? It's crazy how they're linked together, and I never used to appreciate that. I used to think like, oh well, sleeping is just something that most people need. I need less of, and I'm okay without so much of it. But it really does affect you the next day, and then it affects the efficiency of your body as well. So if you're talking about controlling your blood sugar response and your insulin response, burning through calories efficiently, everything is less efficient when your sleep suffered. Not only your food choices and your fasting timer or fasting compliance, but also just how your physiology is working. It's suboptimal. Your glycemic response is worse. Your insulin resistance is up the following day, and it's going to take you until at least the next night's sleep to actually recover from that, if you do well with it, that following day. So it can be a multi-day cycle here. So we really need to look at that as a priority, and definitely a fasting and a health lever, not just kind of an afterthought or an aside like I was guilty of doing for so long.
Yeah, same. I was always, yeah. And we've talked a ton about sleep on this podcast and how important it is. And we
Mm.
have our fasting physiology chart, right? Where like as you up the hours, at 17, 18 hours, you're going to start insulin's going down, blood sugar's down, you're going to start producing more ketones. 24 hours, you'll see BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor increase. You'll start to see some gut changes, some GABA increase. 54 hours, 72 hours, as we go up the 36 hours, lowest insulin's bang, glycogen depleted, etc. But like we can talk about some other big picture reasons why to fast that aren't so time based, but more overall consistently based when it comes to adopting a fasting lifestyle. So one of
Mm.
those is your gut, your gut health. And we are not going to dive into the gut microbiome. That's not our area of expertise, right? Dr. Josh Axe, great resource. Dr. David Jockers, great resource on gut health and gut microbiome. Cellcore, the company itself, has great supplements in terms of gut health, right? But just overall, we hear this from tons and tons of people, and I've had some similar experiences where if I'm sticking to my fasting windows and I'm doing the one or two meals a day, I don't feel things like bloating or heartburn or indigestion or
Mm.
changes in my bathrooms, in my BMs, right? No TMI on this podcast,
All right.
right? So even with my dad, who had celiacs and IBS and all these different things, intermittent fasting and giving the gut a break from constantly being bombarded and constantly having to
Yeah.
be potentially chronically inflamed, um, you know, when you give it a break, you give the body the ability to balance and allow that bacteria in the gut there kind of to balance out and start to repair and heal. And that really
Yeah.
happens, like I mentioned, in that 22 to 24-hour mark. And we're going to be touching some of those categories of chronic disease that we highlighted, 21st century versus previous centuries. If we look back historically, we're going to be touching on some of those things like, you know, autoimmune issues and a lot of the chronic conditions that we have based on this imbalance in the gut. So fasting in itself isn't necessarily for the weight loss, or we talk a lot about blood sugar and diabetes, insulin resistance, but it's really great for your gut. Never mind your energy levels and mental clarity too, right?
Yeah, and that was something that I had never appreciated before, starting to consistently fast either, which was the fact that it like your gut is essentially always in turnover mode. Like every time you eat, you bring in food, the whole process requires cellular turnover. And so without more than like a few hours in between those processes, like essentially the longest portion of that is typically the overnight portion. For most of us, if we're not deliberately fasting, then that's the only time we're going more than maybe 10 or 12 hours to actually give the gut a rest, so we can go through that cellular repair process, which has to happen first before other deeper healing processes and cellular cleansing, going into autophagy. For these things to take place, we need more than just those like 8 or 10 hours, but we definitely can't do it with 3 or 4 hours in between meal times. And so it's crazy how different that feels, because it can mentally, there can be a big block like, hey, I've never thought about that, or that feels very uncomfortable. I mean, even today, if I talk about fasting with somebody new, I'll oftentimes get like, man, I just can't go, more than 3 or 4 hours without a meal. Now I'm getting hangry. My stomach's going crazy. I have all this acid production. Like it's just this huge block for physical reasons and for mental reasons, that it's because you're kind of like optimized for this state of imbalance. Like your body gets used to that food coming in on a very, very, quick, like frequent duration, this frequency. And it does take some time to kind of balance that out with consistency. But man, the getting to the other side of that is so worth it. It's crazy, and it's hard to see that whenever you first start, or before you kind of get to that point or see any of those benefits.
So what I just heard there is, the state of insulin resistance, kind of like what happens when you eat or snack or consume food all throughout the day, multiple times a day, right? So you're going to frequent eating leads to repeated glucose spikes. Now, a glucose spike on its own is not a bad thing. Not like, oh, cortisol is all bad. No, cortisol is a good thing too. We don't want to just black and white everything, right? So you've got repeated blood sugar spikes. You've got a continuous release or demand on the pancreas to produce insulin, which raises the level. Then you've got the insulin receptors that take the food molecules that are broken down into glucose, and they're going to shuttle them into the cells. It's the key that unlocks the glucose, the GLUT4 receptor, the protein that transports into the cell. So the insulin stops working, right? Now you've got excess blood glucose floating around in your system, which is going to lead to stored fat, stored extra glycogen in the liver, ultimately non-alcoholic fatty liver disease if left untreated or unaddressed, and then visceral fat and cravings. You're going to have these energy swings. You're going to have not great energy production. You're going to have what you were just describing, these bouts of highs and lows, hangriness, as we like to say, when my kids are hungry in this, or my wife is hungry in this family, right? Because just if you can remember how you feel lethargic and heavy after a big meal or an afternoon meal, well, the opposite is what happens when you fast. You feel lighter and more energetic. The brain fog goes away. You don't have all of this excess energy floating around in your bloodstream weighing you down. And that's really where we're going to talk about like metabolic flexibility. So in terms of the energy production, you eat food, converts to glucose, triggers a release of insulin. Insulin helps glucose enter the cell. Glucose converts energy inside the cell. The take home here is you need time for that process to happen. Especially if you already have weight loss resistance, cravings for sweets and salties and snacks, and the snacksident where you're not even realizing you just ate a whole thing of Pringles. Right? You're like, oh, I just have a couple. And then next thing you know, you're reaching to the bottom of the can. I've never done it.
Yeah, right. Or you set your fasting timer and you end up in the pantry or in the fridge, like, oh man, and that they didn't even think about the fact that you were supposed to be fasting, or you were already in a fast. Like, man, I just broke my fast early. I didn't even think about it. Yeah, right? Like it can happen like really quick. Like that's a snack accident right there.
Right. So what happens when you fast? Well, no food comes in. Your insulin levels go down. You start to use alternate fuel sources like glycogen that's stored in the liver, stored in your skeletal muscle. And then eventually in that 12 to 24-hour mark, your fat stores start to be broken down, right? You're going to start getting higher levels of ketone production. And then ketones are what's going to give your body the ability to have energy and function. You don't need glucose. If you do, the amazing thing is that your liver can make it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't absolutely need to be ingesting carbohydrates. We truly believe that low carb is the absolute starting point, or 0 to low carb for diabetics.
Sure.
And then the ketones take over, and you start to feel all of these beneficial effects. So we mentioned a few already: gut health, energy levels, mental clarity. Now, we talked about sleep in a negative light, but fasting will absolutely improve your sleep scores if you're one of those folks tracking on a Whoop or an Aura or one of the others out there. Those are the ones that I know because they seem to be the ones that are the most accurate. I use Whoop personally.
Yep,
you're going to see decrease in inflammation. You're going to see stem cell production. You're going to see detoxification take place. All of these things can simply happen just by staying consistent and stopping that vicious cycle of the high insulin, high blood sugar spike state, where it's just a chronic stimulation of this process, which eventually it's going to wear out. Your body's going to give in at some point if you're continually overstimulating it or over-consuming.
Yeah, and those processes are really the cause of some of the more modern disease states that we see that are getting more and more and more prevalent, but like you said earlier, also more prevalent at a younger age too. You have all these whole hosts of autoimmune diseases that people go down just major medical rabbit holes to try to figure out like what's causing this and how do I get around it and can I reverse it and things like that. But we've seen so many incredible results in the research and within our own experiences for folks reversing and controlling, getting under control some of their autoimmune diseases that they've been facing for years and years and years, decades. I mean, it's incredible. And if you think about it, it's like when we're bringing in too much fuel too often, the body's systems to deal with that fuel are essentially can get overwhelmed, and then it's stimulating these growth pathways, these mTOR pathways, and that lead to high levels of chronic inflammation that just don't have a chance to come down. They don't start coming down until blood sugar and thus insulin comes down, and then the body's not trying to just consistently just mobilize just too much fuel. Just being bathed in this fuel has nothing else to do with it. And even some of the riskiest cells that the body can produce, being cancer cells that start to replicate very quickly, they feed off of blood sugar because they need quick access to fuel, and then they replicate very, very quickly. So when we're talking about slowing down the process of just ingesting fuel consistently and giving the body jobs to do that it has to prioritize, that it can't work on healing when it's working on digestion and fuel utilization, it's like we can overwhelm the systems. And then if we do that for months upon months and then years and into decades, they can lead to all of these diverse disease states and processes.
And that's ultimately what we want. So notice we haven't mentioned weight loss yet, right? So after staying consistent with your fasting efforts or your time restricted eating efforts, you'll then see some. In the beginning, you'll probably see some regardless, even if you're feast fast repeating, right? Fast feast repeating, right? You're doing the not watching what you eat. You're going to eat all your food once you break your fast, maybe having a little too much overconsumption because you feel like you're missing out, right? If you're new to fasting. By the way, I've done
like a buffet window.
What'd you say?
Like a buffet
window.
Like
a buffet window, right? But the weight loss really starts to happen, specifically the visceral fat and the belly fat, which is, as you probably know, the hardest fat to get rid of because it's the largest deposition on the body. It's not that your body prioritizes fat loss in certain areas. You can't spot treat fat, right? So sorry, all the body contouring lipo stuff that's out there. Okay. The reality is once you start consistently clearing out and allowing the body to kind of reset some of these signals that we talked about when we first started having this conversation today, this is really where you're going to see some lifestyle adaptation. You can get off the calorie counting roller coaster. You can get off the constant up and down energy swings when your blood sugar starts to stabilize. And I mean, the last conversation or the last piece is really, you're going to see some really cool things happening. And I don't want to say anti-aging or longevity, but we've had some really cool things happen where it's like, wow, my skin's better. It's clearer. I have less wrinkles. Like I feel like I'm reversing my aging. These are all anecdotal, right? In terms of before and after photos that people have shared or stories that we've seen. But the reality is that you're decreasing your risk of disease by staying consistent with your fasting efforts, because we know that fasting can help with obesity, fatty liver, heart disease, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, dementia, certain cancers, autoimmune issues, diabetes, high cholesterol, hypertension, metabolic syndrome. You want to keep going, PCOS, fertility issues, sleep apnea, COPD, chronic inflammation. You can just keep going. And why do we know that? Is because we know that insulin insulin resistance is related to all of those things. So if we fast, we decrease insulin, guess what? You decrease your chance of ever having to worry about the diagnosis, the medication, or ultimately the management of the disease rather than the prevention of said disease, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And so when you think about it, if you're thinking about it as like reversing age, I don't like to think about it in that way.
I know.
But
I didn't even want to say it.
no, I know, but I think it's a great angle to bring up, because it's like when we go through certain disease processes or we experience certain symptoms, including weight gain or lack of being able to take the weight off like we used to be able to, there are certain processes in the body or certain systems in the body that can accelerate the age of them, essentially.
The last piece of this kind of 30,000 foot view, kind of just taking a big picture at the fasting lifestyle, the last piece is really the mental side of it that I want to touch on before we wrap up. And it's that a lot of what we do in today's world, and I'm guilty of this as well, is very is short attention span, quick gratification, right? Happy hormone hunting, dopamine hunting, serotonin hunting type behaviors. What I really want to see, I know for me personally, what I've seen is I've had a really big shift in a lot of other areas of my life in terms of consistency, personal relationships, professional business, etc. When I've been able to really dial in my fasting, because there's this delayed gratification piece or this mental resiliency piece that can be really powerful in terms of teaching us not to be so habitual or slaves to our immediate desires when it comes to our relationship with food. And that's been huge for me, because now it's like, man, I see pizza. That used to be one of my things. I would make sure I had pizza every week. It was my cheat meal day, right? Yeah. Or we'd have drinks, on a date night, or I'd drink Friday and Saturday, wouldn't drink Sunday through Thursday, right? And we're not talking bottles of wine. We're talking a couple of beers here and there. We're talking a mixed drink here or there. And I would never be able to build consistency because I was always playing ping pong back and forth with the fasting, if it fits your macros, calorie counting kind of mindset. So fasting is not really only help the physical side of things, but it has this incredibly powerful subconscious rewiring that takes place where you can start to really shift some of your habits, and you can be more intentional with your decisions and realize that a lot of the stuff you do on a day-to-day basis when it comes to your food noise, if you're not familiar with that, that's a new concept that's out there that has been proven. It's a real thing. And I think we should do a whole episode on food noise, Tommy. It's been really cool seeing this come up as of late. Haven't looked into it as I'm saying this right now, other than just a couple of small snippets that I've seen. So if I'm misclassifying it, don't worry, we'll get to it. But this idea of like this environment, obesogenic, constant stimulated, distracted world of the 21st century, we really need to mute some of that. And fasting has been more of a mental resiliency training for me. As the lifestyle, the weights come down, the labs have improved, and it's really given me and so many of our clients and listeners their lives back. A lot of people come to fasting, right, to lose weight. We started this conversation today with restoring and optimizing health through the tried and true art of intermittent fasting, right? So the reality is the application really needs to be individualized and customized to you, right? Your starting point, your comfort level, but we also need to kind of push you a little bit. And that's what, why we have the podcast consistently, why we have the resources, et cetera. So if you're looking for more support, head to the show notes, click the link. You can head to the Fasting for Life community. It's a great community. We've only had to remove like one person for being a little bit, we're wearing this as a badge of honor. One person for being a little bit too aggressive in terms of how they were interacting in the group, but it's really a warm, inviting group. And I can say that of over 7,000 folks at this point, where you're always going to be insulated. You're going to have a place where you can talk about fasting, because that is truly what we believe is the key to unlocking the best health, the best weight loss, the best prevention that we can possibly get in today's world. So if you want more specific guidance on exactly what your fasting window should be, you can head to the show notes and grab the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss 20-page PDF. It'll give you different schedules, some insights into some of the conditions that we talked about today, some stats, some reference articles as well. But really the takeaway, Tommy, is going to be get plugged in, start to think about this a little bit differently in terms of restoring and optimizing health rather than the number on the scale. And ultimately, if you want more support, join one of our challenges coming up, get on our email list, go check out our resources on the website, but engage with us in any way you can, because we absolutely want to take you on this journey that we've been on, right? But pick one thing that resonated with you today, stew on it for a little bit, and then take that follow-up action. Messy action wins every single time. So Tommy, appreciate the conversation today. Thank you as always, and we'll talk soon.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.